Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name and where you're calling in from as we wait for people to trickle in from the waiting room. We'll get started in about 1 to 2 minutes. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat as you're coming in. I see Billy from Wisconsin, Giovanna from Los Angeles, Sharon from Texas, Brianna from Matsu, Marissa from Indianapolis. I see Bailey, Doug, Andrew, Abigail, Tiffany, and now they're coming in way too fast for me to keep up with. Well, welcome, everyone. Get started in about 30 seconds. Feel free to keep on introducing yourselves. I think the flow in from the waiting room has slowed down, so I'll go ahead and jump right into things. Welcome, everyone. My name is Courtney Cooperman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the project manager of NLIHC's Our Homes, Our Votes campaign. Thank you all so much for joining this webinar. This is actually the 8th webinar in our series, which might be hard to believe. That means we're actually at the halfway point in the series. We started back in April. So time really does fly. And if you're tuning in for the first time today, I encourage you to check out the archive of our past webinars on our website. We'll drop that link in the chat for you as well. I'll also note that it is just under 100 days until the election. So now is really the time to take all of the knowledge that we're talking about on these webinars and put it into practice in your communities. And I know that our panelists today will have a lot of wisdom that you can bring back to your communities to get out the vote. So again, feel free to keep introducing yourselves in the chat. Today's topic is housing providers and voter engagement. Affordable housing providers are in a strong position to register, educate, and mobilize their residents to vote. And to hear about this work, we have on this webinar 2 staff members from members of our Housing Providers Council that are employing creative strategies to promote civic engagement and get out the vote in their communities. We'll hear from Bernadine Martin, Director of Resident Services at Eden Housing, and Sydney Polk-Walker, Senior Director of Community Life for Chicago and the Mid-Atlantic region at the Community Builders. Then we'll hear from Katie West and Harrison Tuttle at Housing Network of Rhode Island, which was one of our NLIHC state partners and one of our Homes, Our Votes pilot community partners, to discuss how housing advocates can partner with housing providers to strengthen their nonpartisan voter engagement work. And before I turn it over to our panelists, I have just a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded. We'll distribute the recording and the links, as well as a saved transcript and the saved chat in the next edition of our Friday email newsletter, which is called The Connection. And we'll also post the recording on the NLIHC YouTube channel by the end of the week. We also have closed captioning enabled. Thank you so much to our captioner for being here today, as always. Please ask questions using the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. With so many people attending, it can be a little bit difficult to catch questions coming through in the chat, and we're more likely to notice them if they come through in the Q&A. Speaking of the chat, we ask that everyone engage thoughtfully and respectfully and live by the platinum rule, which is to treat others the way they want to be treated, even if that's different from the way you want to be treated. And last but not least, a reminder that Our Homes, Our Votes is 100% nonpartisan, meaning that we don't endorse or favor specific candidates or political parties. Our goal is to build the voting power of low-income renters so that we can hold all elected officials accountable to prioritize housing justice. And with that, I will hand it over to Bernadine to get us started.
Thank you, Courtney. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited and pleased to talk to you today about community advocacy and voter engagement. Next slide. Eden Housing creates and sustains high-quality, affordable housing communities that advance equity and opportunity for all. Next slide. For 55 years, Eden Housing has existed to address the affordable housing in California, serving more than 100,000 people. Eden works in partnership with cities and local communities to develop new housing communities. By 2025, Eden has committed to acquiring more than 10,000 homes in communities throughout California and serve a diverse population of 25,000 low-income seniors, families, and people with special needs. Next slide. We believe that home is just the beginning. Quality, affordable housing is a foundational social determinant of health and can serve as a platform to increase access to opportunity and promote the independence and dignity of residents. In order to realize the full benefits of housing as a platform to create healthier and more equitable communities, housing and services must be connected in a way that not only provides resources to residents, but also recognizes and supports the agency of residents and gives them a real voice and shared power in shaping the design, culture, and the operations of their community. This is a quote from Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, and we consider ourselves as one of those stewards. Next slide. Eden's board of directors developed a 5-year plan with the commitment of changing the world one corner at a time. Part of what is embedded in that strategic plan is a commitment to racial, social, and economic justice in all the work we do. Next slide. Why is community advocacy and voter engagement important? First is to educate and engage residents in the civic process, building sustainable housing justice movement, and engaging residents in the process of electing city, county, state, and national officials. And most importantly, that their vote is their voice. Next slide. Eden Housing defines advocacy as a way to create the political will to build, preserve, and to support low-income Californians through housing entitlement process, city council meetings, planning commission, elected officials. Secondly, regulatory, state and federal government, public policy through bills and laws, and individual outreach and access to service. Next slide. In 2020, through a collaborative effort with other nonprofit housing providers, Eden was able to outreach to 43,000 affordable housing residents that turned out to vote. Almost 70% turnout rate of the registered population. Affordable housing properties saw an increase of 18,233 new voter registrations. In 2020, Eden Housing conducted our own resident survey and revealed that 71% of our residents were registered to vote. Next slide. Our focus for registration is to collaborate with other nonprofits, such as Housing Provider Council, to educate and train both our staff and residents, also assist us in messaging to residents for best practices, and also for voter registration materials. Next slide. Also, our focus in 2024 is the right to vote, access to vote, participate in the political process, and we call this RAP. The importance of voting and civic participation is to know your history and not have preconceived ideas of notions of your right to vote. In 1776, only people who owned land could vote, most of whom for white male Protestants over the age of 21. Since that time, there is no federal voting standard as a result of no national standard for voting rights. States have enormous power to pass laws and regulate their own voting laws. Currently, there are over 200 either passed or being developed that is geared towards voter suppression. Voting rights have been a slow struggle to be inclusive for citizens that include people of color, starting with slaves. Even when granted citizenship, rights were denied, and others such as women, Native Americans, Chinese ancestry. Such legal barriers dating back to 1856 in North Carolina that property ownership was a requirement to vote or the special tax to vote, to be denied for failure to pay any tax. Today, much has not changed, so it's important to educate staff and residents to be more empowered to be part of the social justice system to ensure every citizen has the right to vote without intimidation or fear. Next slide. Some changes have occurred over the decades. 1975, Amendment to Voters Act, voting materials in various languages. 1993, National Voter Registration Act passed, voter registration available at DMV, public assistance, and disability agencies. California continues to provide a safe and secure election process. And please note that requirements for voting are different in every state. Next slide. As it relates to voter engagement and leading up to the upcoming election, our focus will be to assist our residents with voter registration, information in a nonpartisan best practice approach, include voter registration at our National Night Out on August 6th, integrate voter registration on our new resident portal, and also reminders of the upcoming National Voter Registration Day in September. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Bernadine. Those statistics of the voter registration rates from the properties following your efforts are really incredible, and I think a testament to how much impact this work can have. Please continue to ask questions for Bernadine in the Q&A. We'll circle back to those at the end of the webinar with the full panel. And with that, I will hand it over to Sydney.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Courtney. Amazing presentation, Bernadine. I am excited to be here on behalf of the Community Builders. I serve as the Senior Director of Community Life for Chicago and the Mid-Atlantic region. Next slide, please. Civic engagement it's been a priority of the work that we do at the Community Builders since I have been there. I'm approaching 13 years. So as much as we discuss community engagement, we prioritize civic engagement within our residents and in all of our properties. Next slide, please. One of the questions I was asked is, why is it nonpartisan? And that's something that often comes up many times when we're engaging with residents and when we have candidates and other, interested parties that may want to, engage with our resident. We are a nonprofit organization, so we have a 501c3 tax exempt status. And so we are unable to endorse or oppose any political candidates in the work that we do in civic engagement. It's necessary for our legal compliance. And the last thing we would want would be for anything to impede us for working with the residents that we work with every day to do that. And like as Tiffany put in the chat, it is definitely better to be unbiased. In building the public trust, we serve the public good. Maintaining a nonpartisan stance helps us to do that, right? And so we're there to empower the residents to make their own decisions, not to make those decisions for them. And we are mission focused. So our mission at the Community Builders is to build and sustain communities where all people can thrive, regardless of your political views, you have a place within our community. Next slide, please. We have hundreds of properties that participate in civic engagement across our portfolio. You know, I have over 10 properties in my portfolio in Chicago, Oakwood Shores, that you see right here. Tony Preckwick, one of our representatives in the community, is one of the largest in our portfolio. And so we, in doing the community life process, we have a lot of ways that we are able to actualize civic engagement. One of the first ways is deputy registrar registration. And so, the community builders, being a nonprofit organization, and others are able to reach out to our county clerk and request to sponsor deputy registrars who are then able to register their neighbors and their peers. And that's one of our first steps that we take every time there's an election, be it midterms or presidential, is to increase our number of deputy registrars. And so, the deputy registrar, though it is like an antiquated process where individuals are kind of walking up to you with paper, and now you have the opportunity to register online, deputy registrar still provides a vessel for those individuals who may be a little bit more versed in the political process to have those conversations with their neighbors. So deputy registrar is a very easy process. Becoming a deputy registrar may take, I think it's a 10-minute course that it takes, that you take online after you receive the sponsorship letter. And after that, you receive your deputy registrar card, and you are able to go and have boots to the ground to increase our impacts. On-site voter registration, after we do that, we are able to dispatch those deputy registrars to our events that we have planned on the site. So be it youth events, or family-oriented or senior events, we're able to have a table set up where residents can come and engage and register to vote right there on the property. Targeting 17-year-olds has become a tradition of ours. So if you are 18 by the time of the election, you are able to register to vote. And so we are intentional about going into our system and understanding, our ages of our residents and our teenagers, and making an intentional outreach to those residents and trying to make it fun. Trying to make it fun. So have 17-year-olds, maybe they come to we have an Oakwood Center on this site. Maybe they come to the center to have pizza and re-register to vote. And we talk about the political process, but being very intentional about reaching out to those students that live on our site that are approaching that age. Activating polling places. Many of our sites have polling places that are in walking distance. Those times we have set up at those polling places with a table and snacks and treats, just to kind of encourage our residents who may be in line or those who may need a little bit more motivation. There have been elections where there have been longer lines than others. We have had chairs and things to make them more comfortable in the process and just to support them along the way. Youth and resident leadership support. We do believe in resident leadership at the Community Builders. We always say our goal is to eventually work ourselves out of jobs. So we always have resident leaders in the wings supporting the work that we're doing and oftentimes leading those initiatives. So those resident leaders are dispatched across the community to go out and identify those residents who may need a little bit more information about the election that's coming up or being able to register to vote. Incentives and events. We all like to get free things. And so sometimes it's as simple as coming by Oakwood Center or coming by another community space within the community after you receive your I Voted ticket is enough motivation to get people to vote. And one thing that we did recognize early on, similar to the statistics that Bernadine touched upon, is when we completed our annual community life questionnaire, civic engagement was a part of that questionnaire. And so we wanted to know how many individuals were registered to vote. And our initial goal at the beginning of our strategic plan was having 80% of residents registered to vote. And we came right out hot. We had that percentage that was registered, but how do we now know that those residents who are registered are actually voting? And so shifting our priorities from now we have a high level of registration to making sure that they are mobilized, making sure that they understand how elections impact their daily life has become a lot of our priority. And so we talk about partnerships with city and local institutions. We often bring in individuals again to kind of break down those ballots, help them, want to make sure that they're equipped when they go into the voting booth. Candidate forums. Yes, we are nonpartisan, and as long as we open it up to everyone, we can host one. So if individuals do not come, that's up to them. But as long as if we have, like, for instance, we have an automatic race or a mayor race, if we open it up and send it out and outreach to everyone, then we're able to host one at our site. Neighborhood polling places, many of our sites, you do not have to travel far to vote. And so we want to increase that, especially for our residents who may have limited mobility. We talk about strategic outcome. Civic engagement, like I said, I have been with the organization over a decade. It has been a priority and remains a priority. It goes across departments. Yes, I am in community life department, and we are the ones who often host the resident leadership opportunities and engagement opportunities, but it is a priority from development to property management, asset management, and us. And communications. It consistently is communicated internally and externally to our residents. You can move to the next slide. These are a couple flyers to the right that some of our organizations on the East Coast distributed to residents at times of elections. And the biggest thing that we talked about, and I see some individuals talking about it in the chat, is voting is the opportunity for us to just empower our residents. We always say we just work there. And we know it's amazing work, it's difficult and challenging and impactful work, but it's their community. And so for them to know that they have an opportunity to have a vested interest and create some sustainable impact, and voting is a way to do that, we want to make sure that we prioritize that. And civic engagement empowers residents to advocate for their specific needs and interests. Access to resources. Active civic participation can help residents gain access to essential resources and services that they need. I know when I initially came to one community, we did not have a grocery store in that community. Engaging those residents and helping them mobilize around going to those meetings and having their voice heard was very powerful and impactful on us, kind of dismantling what was a food desert. Helping them have improved access to healthcare, education, public safety, and social services. And again, community empowerment. It is their community. And we know that we are often dealing with, most of the time, with the work that we are doing in affordable housing, we are dealing with the residual impact of systems that have been set up to disenfranchise certain individuals and certain people. And so the work that we do every day dismantles that, and we work to increase equity. And voting is a way for them to feel empowered and for them to know that them collectively working together can move that needle. Policy influence. We have to understand sometimes it has to be changed at the policy. It is above us. It is above us, and giving them the skills and the needs and partnering with those organizations who are experts in that field to help that. Representation, improve quality of life. Again, we are in Chicago and we deal with our own, our challenges every day, but empowering residents with what they need to be able to make a positive impact on that. And making them feel, assisting them in the confidence that they need and the tools that they need to be equipped to have those conversations and, address authority when necessary is something that we work every day to do. And we do that through educational awareness. Again, building networks, like I said, residential leadership is a priority of ours. Every table that we are at, we feel a resident should be sitting there too, because they know much better than us what is necessary for their community to thrive. Next slide, please. This again is just another little quick snapshot of some data. I apologize for it being small, but are some data around what was collected in our annual community life questionnaire. And it was around voter registration. But like I said, now that we see that there are a lot, we have a large amount of residents who are registered, we want to make sure that they are mobilized. We want to make sure that they are equipped, they have what they need to be able to feel comfortable and confident with making those decisions regarding elected officials moving forward. Next slide, please. And that concludes my part of the presentation, but if you have any questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, to my email right there, that's cpoke@tcbinc.org, or my phone number. I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sydney. This is all just such fantastic work, and I know there's a lot of great questions for you coming in that we will circle back to at the end. Just congratulations on all of this work. I think especially what you said about resident leadership and working yourself out of a job by empowering residents really resonated with me, and I think will resonate with a lot of others on this call as well. Great. So I'm now going to pass it to Katie and Harrison from Housing Network of Rhode Island to speak from the perspective of state level advocates and how they partner with housing providers in their community.
Thanks, Courtney, and NLIHC. It's great to be here with such a great group of folks involved in civic engagement initiatives across different states. You can go to the next slide. I'll get started. You can skip. Yeah. So we work for the Housing Network. We're a membership organization of 19 nonprofit community developers based in Rhode Island. And we are the backbone for Homes RI, which is a multi-sector statewide coalition of advocates working to increase the supply of affordable housing. So we use the Homes RI umbrella and coalition to uplift our advocacy efforts and our civic engagement, voter engagement efforts. You can go to the next slide. So wanted to offer a perspective from sort of the other side on how we built partnerships with housing providers. Obviously, we have a built-in membership who served as natural partners, and we are in our third cycle of participating in the Our Homes, Our Votes initiative in partnership with NLIHC, which we are appreciative of because it's allowed us to really start to build a culture of civic engagement and be like, we're doing this and getting our members on board. We initially narrowed it down to 5 cities for voter engagement. Just where this is a pilot and we're doing some things we haven't done before with our funding. We hosted an orientation in April for our members to just talk about what our plans look like, get their input and feedback. And almost all of the members who attended that orientation wanted to participate in our Homes, Our Vote efforts. And one consideration that we had, we wanted to make it easy for our members to say yes and feel like we're doing a service for them and their residents. And while we want the staff to be engaged in this effort, trying to make it as easy as possible. And Harrison can talk about ways that we've done that with our canvassing efforts. And we're in different stages of implementing plans with members, including door knocking, in-person canvassing, but also tabling at different outreach events, trainings and workshops with staff, and general voter education campaigns. Next slide. We wanted to collaborate with housing providers. For many, I think it's sort of the same reasons that Sydney said that, their organization is invested in this. We want to reach people. We want to reach tenants who, Rhode Island is a state where 40% of the population are renters, and our members provide a way to reach folks, particularly in the target communities that we decided to target based on the high percentage of renters in those communities, lower voter turnout, and a strong member presence. Building a culture of civic engagement, and Our Homes, Our Vote supports goals that housing providers might have around general resident engagement and the policy connectivity and advocacy connectivity. So doing this helps build a base by providing an access point and an entry for folks to get more information about housing policy, get involved, and to civically engage. I'm going to turn it over to Harrison now to talk about how we do that.
Thank you so much, Katie. Wait for the next slide. Part of our engagement with renters is canvassing. We want to make sure that what our target locations are, and when the voters that are there, both unregistered and registered to vote, are one in which we're making an impact that we can track. And so what we started off by doing is we created a list of all the membership rental units in the target cities. We made sure that we verified their physical addresses. And so we got a general idea as to how many units were in each development. And so it's important to note that, for an example, like West Elmwood, which is a housing provider here in Rhode Island on the south side of Providence, they have multiple developments. And so not only are we looking at one development, but we're looking at multiple. Some range within an apartment complex, some range with multifamily. And so just trying to understand as to what is ahead really helped us put together a plan around canvassing. Another example of the process that we took is having access to the voter file. So what we did is we reached out to the department, the Secretary of State here in Rhode Island, to find out, like I said, which people are registered to vote versus who aren't, based in the given developments that we selected. And from there, it's, understanding the population that you have and developing canvas scripts to be able to address those goals. And one of the things that we did is we made sure that we guide people throughout the election process. And so what does that mean? That means being able to say, okay, here is the deadline on August 10th that is coming up, for example. This is the deadline for voter registration in the Rhode Island primary that happens in September. And so making sure that people are aware of those deadlines, whether it is a mail-in ballot, whether it is early voting as the months come to follow, is going to be really important for us and how we determined to develop our scripts. And we know that not everyone is going to be home. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're still touching them in a way in which they can see the flyer that you can see here on the right-hand side. And so we really wanted to make sure that we provided as much information as we could as to providing information to voters while utilizing the tools that were given to us by Our Homes, Our Votes, such as TurboVote, which is an election reminder tool that we use to make sure that people are getting text messages or emails as to when upcoming things are coming up. Next slide. And so this kind of comes into a little bit of what Katie was mentioning around site prep, having established contacts for property managers, individuals that are in proximity to residents can be helpful, especially around canvassing efforts that result in us needing access to buildings. And so when thinking about the developments in which you would want to knock individuals and that have access, that you can have access to, and making sure that if there's different languages that are spoken within the development, that we're being mindful of the fact that not everyone speaks English. And so how do we get around that by having different people in the community or different staff members at the development that's able to speak the language of the individuals at the doors. One thing that was really important for us when establishing this canvassing plan is how we use technology and how we used Van during that technology. And so using the voter file is essential because we need to know, as I mentioned in the previous slide, who we're knocking. And if we don't know who we're knocking, then we're going to be unable to help them. And so we use a tablet. We also use smartphones that will cut down on paper to make sure that at the end of the day, we're moving efficiently through the developments. Next slide. And just be flexible, right? At the end of the day, we're dealing with people, and we're dealing with people at different parts of their lives with different beliefs. And we're also dealing with staff at housing developments that are also at capacity. And so making sure that just because you have a plan, don't become stuck in that plan. Make sure that you're flexible so that you can meet the interests of those individuals, those renters that you're talking to. I think based on some of the people that spoke today, it's no secret that food is a unifier among all people. And so when you're holding educational workshops or you're trying to bring out people, making sure that you're providing what we see as something that where people could see as not as impactful, but it's us providing a basic necessity in which people can use. And so being able to estimate staff time for canvassing are sometimes needed based on the amount of doors, based on weather. There are a lot of different things that go into it, and having good communication with that housing provider is incredibly important. For anybody who has canvassed for a candidate before in different areas, you may know that contact rate may not be as high, right? And we know that there are historical reasons for that. And so don't be discouraged by the low contact rates. Do everything that you can to try to connect with people at these developments. And if you don't contact them, as I mentioned in the previous slide, leave a piece of literature so that they know that you're there. And so the next time that you could possibly be there, they'll know who you are. And so canvassing, as I mentioned, is just one of the methods of outreach and engagement. There's educational workshops that are helpful specifically for folks that are either elderly or dealing with disabilities. Making sure that the information at the end of the day is accessible to them is something that we really value, whether that is tabling at a community event or doing, trainings and workshops with housing providers. We love the input that everyone here provides. We want to be able to use some of the best practices that have been talked about today alone and implement it in our program. So although that we're doing it right now, we talk about flexibility. It's being able to be open to different ideas. If you ever want to contact myself or Katie or the organization itself, the contact information is here, and I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harrison and Katie. It's really such a joy working with you all through Our Homes, Our Votes. And it's been really great to see all of these canvases and other events and how you just hit the ground running with them. So I appreciate you sharing the wisdom from those experiences with this call. So before we move into the Q&A from the audience, and we have a slew of great questions here, I'm just going to give a little bit of context and information regarding nonpartisanship and permissibility of this work for HUD-funded agencies, just because we get a ton of questions about this. So I figured I would share the information rather than kind of answering those questions individually. We can go to the next slide. So we often get questions about whether this work is permissible for public housing agencies or HUD multifamily properties, basically anyone that's receiving federal funding. We often get that sort of question. And I'm here to emphasize that public housing agencies and other HUD subsidized providers absolutely can and should do nonpartisan voter engagement. It's always been the case that HUD-funded agencies have been allowed to do this work, and the Biden administration reiterated this in its executive order on promoting access to voting in 2021, which calls upon federal agencies and their subsidiaries to do everything in their existing legal power to increase voter registration and turnout. So kind of complying with this executive order, HUD sent out messages to public housing directors and owners of HUD multifamily housing, reminding them of their ability to do nonpartisan voter engagement and outlining some of the activities that they are not only permitted, but actively encouraged to do. I kind of put snapshots of them on this slide. We'll drop the link in the chat where you can find all of these announcements on our website, which came directly from HUD. And we also summarize them into a do's and don'ts fact sheet, which we'll drop in the chat as well. And I'm always happy to set up a time to talk about some of these specifics coming from HUD. We can go to the next slide. I know that all of our speakers referenced the Housing Providers Council, and I realize that may not be familiar to everyone if you're new to these calls. The Housing Providers Council is part of the Our Homes, Our Votes campaign. It's a group of housing developers, property managers, and resident services staff that are committed to doing what we're all here talking about, which is boosting voter turnout among their residents. The group meets every other month to share best practices in nonpartisan resident voter engagement and to do deeper dives into some of these activities that we've talked about on this call. So we'll drop a link where you can learn more about the Housing Providers Council. I'll just note that this group is geared specifically towards subsidized housing developers and property managers and resident services staff. For other organizations that don't fall within this category, we do have the affiliates network, which also is kind of a way that you can identify with and be formally part of the campaign. So I will stop talking now. We have a ton of great questions. So I invite all of our panelists to come back on screen. I think we can take down the slides so we can see everyone's faces. Awesome. And let's get started with questions. I see a really great question from Sean. Can you give some tips on how to engage people without the person feeling like they're being lectured? So what are some tips for kind of having these conversations without, talking at someone or talking down to them? Harrison, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I think the most important thing is just understanding that you have a goal that you want to accomplish, but at the end of the day, the goal cannot be accomplished unless that person actively chooses that. And so one of the big things that I think was talked about today in different forums is just meeting people where they're at, right? Making sure that you're not looking at them as a data point, but as a human being and as someone that could potentially grow into a position that they are no longer that they're not taking, or you would like them to take moving forward.
Thanks, Harrison. Does anyone else want to chime in on that one? Cool. Now we can go on to another question. I have a question for Sydney from Stephen. Is deputy registrars, is that specific to Illinois? Go ahead.
It is not, and I could maybe possibly the name is different, but being able to contact your county agency, a board of elections, and seeing what your specific deputy registrar process is open to everyone nationally.
Thanks,
Mhm.
Sydney.
Mhm.
Yeah, different places have all different requirements for, if you need to be deputized to register voters. So definitely check in with your county or city clerk's office to learn what those requirements look like and what sorts of trainings are available. Another question that we got for Sydney from Gina. Gina would love to hear more about the candidate forums. What are they like? How do you typically run them? And do you have tips for successful candidate forum? I'll also put in a plug here that our next webinar will be specifically on the topic of candidate engagement. We'll dive into that a little bit more.
Perfect. I would say the first thing is just creating a form letter, letting them know the mission of your organization and why it would be important to you, to host a candidates forum. Let them know that it's nonpartisan and it's open to everyone, and getting those letters out as soon as possible to everyone. I would then say following up with a call, making friends of whoever the gatekeeper is in that specific office, to just kind of continue the outreach and get some people to commit to being there. In those events, we don't just allow a space where it's just a panel discussion the whole time. We may do some cool things like some games. We typically do something like look at the ballot. How do you read the ballot, the paper ballot versus, use the electronic ballot, those type of things that go on, or understanding what certain bills may be on the specific ballot that's coming up, doing some things around that, but making it fun, using the service, something like Kahoot, a game that's kind of fun and engaging. People are kind of able to use with their phones, and then have a part that's similar to this, where initially we will have the residents submit their questions so that the questions are not, anything that us as a staff want to know, but specifically generated from the community. And then we would just pass the mic around, giving everyone 2 minutes apiece to discuss it. What they said, also providing some guidelines for those candidates. This opportunity for everybody to hear generally where they stand on specific issues and concerns for this community. Is not a space to campaign, but it's a space for you to be able to engage and for us to have some mutual understanding of the impact you intend on making.
Thank you. I love that, it's not just a one-way street of candidates sharing their views, but something that's really interactive and inclusive. We got a great question from Daniela. How do you involve people with lived experience in leading civic engagement work? Harrison, go for it.
Yeah, I think the main thing is just making sure that their voices and what they want is included in the plan itself. So a lot of times that we try to search for answers and solutions that we come up with that we think is best for a population, when the population is going to tell you exactly what they need. And, understanding that there are people that may be put off by elections, but that doesn't mean that they don't want to help the community. It's also important to know that people that are directly impacted have reasons why they don't want to participate in any given thing. And so making sure that, again, you're meeting them where they're at, so that you can get them to a place in which they feel comfortable of taking their own initiative to vote. Because at the end of the day, we're relying on that person to making that decision for themselves. And so we're guiding them and we're assisting them in those plans and everything that we're doing.
Thanks, Harrison. Does anyone else want to chime in on that question? Cool. If not, we can go. I see a question from Sean. Are you able to have something people could win, such as a gift card, to encourage people to get registered? I'll chime in on this one and say it's really important to be careful for nonpartisan organizations around offering any sort of incentive around voting. So what you could do is, let's say you're tabling and offering voter registration, you could have like stickers or small prizes that are available to everyone, but you can't really offer like an incentive specifically for registration or voting. So you can, celebrate that act of registering and make something available to everyone. But yeah, just like incentivizing a specific activity, I would steer away from that. I'm seeing some nods, so it seems like there's a consensus in the group on that.
Yeah, I would say similar to what you said, just increasing energy around the day. Cannot give you anything specific for voting, but like I said, if you have something like your voting ticket, we may have pizza or something to, watch the election results or watch the debate together or something like that, just trying to boost momentum and incentivizing in that way works well.
For sure. Great. I'm seeing another question about transportation, noting that one of the biggest barriers for voters is transportation. Are your organizations doing anything to address transportation barriers, or how do you respond to residents if they're facing obstacles to getting to the polls?
I can say that because again, we one of our polling places can be a couple blocks away, but that's a very long distance for someone with limited mobility, right? Even if it's a block or two away. So there have been times where we have had maybe a van to transport people. This time specifically depends on amount of people because buses are so expensive for us, honestly. Like $500. The price has just increased as gas has increased. But if there are like 30 or 40 individuals that are registered that need transportation, we would definitely provide transportation for them to be able to get to the polls. Absolutely.
Great. And I'll note from those HUD announcements that I shared, one of the announcements talks specifically about resident councils and how they can use resident council funds for transportation to the polls, like as a resident service. So if you're with a resident council, I definitely recommend looking into that as an option to facilitate transportation to the polls.
And also, Courtney,
Yep.
one of the things that we do is to just identify the nearest polling places that are in the proximity of the properties that they live as well. Because sometimes people don't always get the notice or they're unaware of it.
And one other thing, Courtney, too, is we really advocated for vote by mail when it became available in Illinois as well. And so specifically for some of our residents with limited mobility, making sure that they filled out the paperwork, accurately to be able to receive the ballot via mail, then picked it up, dropped it off for some of them. So that process too has helped a lot over the last couple of years.
Great. I'll also, go ahead, Brendan.
Yeah, and also to add to that, I think most people are highly educated about voting by mail now. And the great thing about voting by mail, once you do that, there is a lot of tracking and follow-up to that. And so the person is verified that their ballot has been received. and you get a notice about that. And even using technology through your email, you get alerts about verification of your ballot. So all those things are great for people who can't get out to vote.
Yeah, for sure.
Just gonna quickly add to in thinking about multiple solutions or strategies in Rhode Island, we're fortunate to have early voting. So conversing with people to, maybe getting a ride on election day or transportation on the day is difficult, but educating people about the early voting period and where they're able to vote. Also, as Harrison said, we've been encouraging people also to vote by mail if that's the best option for them. So multiple strategies that we have.
Thanks, Katie. I'll also add as kind of a long-term consideration that you may want to advocate with your election office to have a polling place added closer to your community, or maybe to have a ballot drop box added if your state has ballot drop boxes. At this point, it takes a little while to get those polling places approved, so it may not be feasible for 2024, but it's never too early to start for 2025 and beyond if you feel that your polling places aren't accessible. Advocate to get one that's closer to your community. Great. So I'm seeing kind of a few questions that I'll combine together on apathy and getting people who don't care to vote. Do you have any suggestions regarding how to overcome that sort of apathy that you may encounter, and specifically how empowering tenant leadership can assist with that? Harrison.
There was a national conference hosted by this organization not too long ago, where one of the speakers said that people who don't vote are allowing people to make a decision for them. And so that's really all you need to say. At least in my experience, when talking to people who wish to not participate in what they deem to be a system that does not work for them, it is not countering an argument that says, well, it does, because it clearly doesn't. It's saying you're putting the power back into people's hands by saying, are you choosing to allow it to continue to happen this way? And so that's what I would say. That's what I do say to people at the doors.
Great point. Yeah, I think we also often point to the fact that elections can be very close and your vote may make the difference. It might not seem like it, but it really is possible, especially in state and local elections where there are fewer voters. We point to the fact that the right to vote is really a hard-won right, and it's important to exercise it. And if people wouldn't be trying so hard to take it away if it didn't matter. So there's a lot of different strategies. Of course, which one is most effective will probably depend on which community you're in and who you're speaking with. But Harrison raised a lot of really great points. Cool. Okay, let's see. A few other questions. Let's see. Someone asked a question for Sydney about providing transportation. Does your organization have any liability concerns when you've provided transportation? And if so, how do you work around them?
Well, if we use transportation, it would be directly through one of our partners who set up as a vendor. And so they would be responsible for insurance. Their insurance would have been approved with it. Liability would have fallen on them. I will say that is the reason why I don't allow staff to take them to the polling place. Our staff are committed and they would, in a second, would load up their cars and trucks to take individuals to polling places. But because of the liability, we don't. We have had times where we have walked them a couple blocks, for those who may have needed support. But the thing that has worked best for us, echoing Katie and Bernadine, is taking advantage of those early polling times, and that vote by mail has been the best.
Thanks, Sydney. Yeah, the more voting options people have, the likelier it is that they'll be able to overcome those obstacles.
Yes, and I want to echo Harrison really quick. I think what works the best for me is being able to apply it directly to someone's life. Because we always kind of think about like the NIMBY complex, not in my backyard. It does not impact me. How does this impact me? And it is easy to be apathetic sometimes if you kind of take a survey of the land and you feel like your specific conditions have not been improved for generations and generations and generations. I don't see how it positively impacts me. When you can talk specifically about why certain schools receive certain funding or why certain neighborhoods have certain resources like grocery stores or policing, and you can directly tie it to a vote, that has been most impactful for me working with residents, specifically younger residents.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can add to that, one of the things in which we're working with our members is obviously it's affordable housing, so it's subsidized. And so kind of drawing that connection with the fact that, for example, we have a housing bond in November to increase housing production in our state that's desperately needed, making note that the fact that you're living in this unit, in this development in general, is a byproduct of people voting for affordable housing. And wouldn't that be something that you should take action for other people to do as well?
Yeah, that's a great
Yeah.
point. Elected officials are setting the budgets for programs that are determining if repairs can be made in people's housing. There's a really, really direct connection there.
Yeah, and I just want to echo that too. We have a big initiative coming up in California on the ballot in November. And so, we are really trying to educate our residents about that. They have housing, affordable housing, and how they can provide opportunities for others to have affordable housing by voting.
Thank you. We got a question from Rosa about coordination with churches. Are any of your organizations coordinating with churches or other houses of worship in these efforts?
We have our neighboring, churches around us who we partner on many programs or organizations. So definitely, getting out to engage and partnering on civic engagement opportunities has been one of those as well.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question. Someone asked if anyone touched upon providers using tenant leadership. I know that was touched upon. I know Sydney spoke about working yourselves out of a job with tenant leadership. But if anyone wants to elaborate more on tenant leadership and specifically what that engagement can look like, I think that would be really helpful.
I think every capacity outside of things that affect confidentiality, you should have a resident next to you or a community member learning what you know. Like I said, when I started years ago, that was the goal, right? So everything that I'm able to do, the goal is for a resident to be able to do it one day and to be able to ensure that their work is sustainable. And so we have health champions that focus on health initiatives and those residents that will be focusing on this kind of civic engagement initiative. But I think whatever you can equip them in, whatever their specific goals are and that they are excited about, that they have a much broader ability and access than we have, with their neighbors and their peers. And I think they're our biggest assets.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm seeing a comment on churches being nonprofits and having to be careful. And I'll just say it's the same rules apply regarding nonpartisanship, where houses of worship can get out the vote, but can't endorse candidates. They have to keep everything nonpartisan like other nonprofits. Great. Well, we have just 2 minutes left, and I want to give a few closing reminders and announcements, and just make sure you all know how to stay involved beyond the webinar series. So we can pull the slides back up just for the last few minutes. And thank you so much to our panelists for being here, for sharing all of your wisdom and for engaging in such a fantastic conversation. So just to quickly run through a few of the ways to get involved beyond continuing to attend the webinars, we have our affiliates network. This network is open to all nonpartisan organizations that share the goals of the campaign. We have regular office hours for our affiliates. We have an email listserv where we'll share out opportunities and exchange ideas. And we'll have a post-election gathering that is exclusive to the affiliates. Our next office hours I did not update that slide. The next office hours will be this Friday from 1 to 3 p.m. We'll drop the link in the chat where you can sign up for that. We can go to the next slide. We also, I believe, alluded to this earlier in the webinar. We have TurboVote, which is our one-stop shop where voters can register, check their voter registration status, find election information for their community, and sign up for election reminders. You can scan that QR code or go to ourhomes.turbovote.org to check that out. And always feel free to reach out if you want to talk about ways to incorporate that into your outreach. We can go to the next slide. We also have our online resource library. If you haven't checked it out, I definitely encourage you to do so. That's at ourhomes-ourvotes.org/resources. We can go to the next slide. And I think I say this on every call and will continue to do so until the end of the series. I encourage you to sign up to become a community partner for National Voter Registration Day, which is a nonpartisan civic holiday dedicated to celebrating and encouraging voter registration. There's a lot of swag for community partners, a lot of online resources and guidance, so you can register at that link. We'll also get that shared in the chat. We can go to the next slide. I think I alluded to this also earlier when Sydney was talking about candidate engagement. Our next webinar will take place on August 19th, and it will be on the topic of getting candidates on the record about housing and homelessness, which I know is a theme that comes up a lot. We talk about we're not just voting for the sake of voting, but voting so that we can hold candidates accountable. So we'll dive into that a little bit more next time. We can go to the next slide. And here's just a quick preview of the remaining 8 webinars. A lot of good content we've already gone through and a lot of good content coming up. So I hope to continue seeing you on these calls. And of course, you can also check out our website for the archives of past webinars and recordings of them. I think that brings us to the end. Thank you all so much for being here. And then I think some of the links may have gone just to hosts and panelists. Hillary, would you mind dropping those in the chat to everyone?
It looks like I only have the option to send it to host and panelists.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. I can try to drop some of them in there. Sorry about that setting. All right. All right, my links are not pasting into the chat for some reason, but we will have all of those on the website and in the follow-up email. So thank you all, everyone, for being here.